had 2 cups of coffee and a bunch of chocolate, so I am just jacked for my presentation today. And I'm going to say you're close to being on time, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, we have to be on time. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Without any further ado, then let me get this going and lay this on you guys. Oh, why am I here when I should be over here? All right. I think that's it. If everyone can see my screen, Philip?
No, not just yet. Now
I have to press the magic button. All right.
Fantastic.
Cool. So I'm going to spend the next half hour or so, and I'm going to talk a lot about Cyber Threat Intelligence Workshop. This actual talk could be described as Ian babbles on about cool things that he really enjoys. That's also a way of describing the talk. You know, I've been in this IT security community for a long time. DEF CON 9 was my first DEF CON, and, you know, to be honest, I'm missing it hugely. But one of the things that being in the IT security community and being almost, you know, an elder statesman somewhere between Jack Daniel and at the very beginning of all of this, was really a bit of a perspective. And, you know, the key message and takeaway is this too shall pass. You know, and I think what we can do together as a community is a really powerful thing. And I really hope from this presentation you see that cyber threat intelligence is not particularly esoteric, and you might be able to immediately implement some of the things that I'm talking about in your organization if you haven't already. I have a corporate mode as well as my dark mode, but my corporate mode, I spend a lot of time digesting and commenting and analyzing, really taking my background in criminal intelligence, applying it to threat actors, understanding threat models for businesses, and ultimately, you know, trying to protect our customers with, you know, our service offering, right? Basically, we are a dashboard that we can grab all sorts of different threat intel feeds, customize and make bespoke reporting for your organization. That's enough about us. So I want to discuss the intelligence cycle a little bit more broadly, and then I'll walk through kind of a demonstration of how this all kind of comes together and works. But ultimately, you know, like most things in cybersecurity, if you don't know what your attack surface is, if you don't know how your business makes money, then it's almost impossible to protect it with effective technical security controls or an education program. So ultimately, the inputs that you need are fundamental cybersecurity practices like asset management, if you can believe it. And I'm a strong advocate of getting folks to draw pictures. I find that pictures are a universal language that IT folks can use to communicate to other sides of the business, either data flows or actual infrastructure pictures. This is because the key takeaway is that cyber threat intelligence has 2 feet. It has a foot in the business, okay, so understanding risk, understanding the threat model, and then a foot in the technical side of the business. And in a lot of cases, I see this position being critical to success because there needs to be someone in your organization that can translate business to IT and IT back to business. And that person, if they are properly trained and understand what an intelligence cycle is, can add tremendous value to the organization by, I would say, taking the IT version of the world, which is it on, is it off, does it work, does it not work, and translating that into the more nuanced conversations of the business, and not have, I would say, a global meltdown when IT and the business get in each other's way of the successful mission of an organization. So, you know, CTI program is really about thinking about the future and anticipating cyber attacks on the organization, right? Detecting those attacks, hopefully before they're actually even realized at your firewall or inside your network. Identifying evidence of previous cyber attacks, very important as well. And of course, ultimately, an intelligence program is to inform not just security and IT decisions, but business decisions. So for instance, if somebody came to me right now and said, we're thinking about opening a branch office in Hong Kong, I would suggest that that might be a bit of a hostile environment right now. And that there are a number of geopolitical reasons why that might be a challenge, but there's also potential cyber exposures there as well that need to be addressed. So as an intelligence program and more broadly, you're looking at all sorts of different feeds or different pieces of information to put together a picture. And that can be used for strategic business decisions as well. So, you know, we've talked already this morning about phishing email. You know, I've heard anywhere between 70 to 90% of impactful attacks are delivered to organizations via spear phishing and phishing email campaigns. I think that's totally true, but it's what happens after that is really important, because if you're in national critical infrastructure, or if you're in, for instance, healthcare right now, and you have access to intellectual property relating to vaccinations, ransomware is the least of your worries, right? It's really about dropping an exploit into your environment, a lateral movement, deploying a Trojan, launching all sorts of different payloads to ensure that you have persistence in that environment, and exfiltrating as much intellectual property as possible. That might be one threat model for the defense intelligence agencies, for anyone in the military industrial complex, in the healthcare vaccine complex. In our day-to-day existence, the majority of the attacks are essentially attacks that will deliver some sort of ransomware component, but also increasingly from some of the cyber criminal actors that we've seen, exfiltrating the data to use as blackmail and leverage in order for you to pay the fine. So a lot of the times what you're asked to do is figure out what it is your business commercial offering is. What are the most important aspects to that commercial offering, and then threat model the actual attacks that you can see. And the MITRE attack framework, which I'm going to mention in a little bit later on in the process, is a great example of how you can storyboard or war game these things out in your own organization. So the other thing that is a huge component of cyber threat intelligence is going into places, you know, essentially grabbing information that may not be on the public domain. It may require access and vetting in order for you to get a foothold into those environments. I'm talking about Telegram and WhatsApp groups and ICQ and things like that. But also, there's a number of raid forums, some actually open to the public, some not, that also have data for sale and other criminal activities. These are important to businesses for a number of different reasons, but primarily it's to try and detect early in the phase of whether or not there's been a compromise or a data breach at your organization or among a trusted business partner or a very large customer that happens to be, you know, a major source of your revenue. So there are areas of the internet that are very dangerous, that you need to be very careful, and you need to be trained in order to understand those particular environments, largely criminal. And we do a fair amount of work with the national police here in the UK, as well as regional organized crime. So what I want to do now is kind of walk you through a cyber threat intelligence exercise very quickly and understand how information is turned into intelligence, and then how that intelligence is applied to a business decision. And so what we can see here is an alert that came from your collection plan based on your threats. You want to know about vulnerabilities, and a really good source of vulnerabilities is, of course, the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. You sign up for a newsletter, and every couple of days you get some sort of alert and notification. In this particular case, we're seeing that this alert came out. It's flagged as highly critical, and it talks about the one thing that should catch everybody's sort of eye is remote code execution. Remote code execution essentially means that somehow I'm able to do something to the environment remotely. I don't need to be inside the local area network. So this is a really bad thing if it's exposed, right? Pretty straightforward. So the first thing you do as a good intelligence analyst is you assign some sort of credibility and reliability scores to the information, right? So obviously somebody saying something on Twitter may have very minimal credibility. You've never seen them before, so you can't even gauge what the reliability is of the information that they're providing. And this, a great classic example that we're seeing about this right now is the so-called giant denial of service attack that happened on the United States, and some Twitter account claimed that this was an anonymous attack, right? Okay. And then also there was a claim that it was attributable to the North Koreans. So interesting, but again, had never seen that Twitter account before, and so I don't even know what to benchmark them at, right? Very low credibility, low reliability. Conversely, government organization like the NCSC, going to be highly credible and highly reliable because of their track record, right? So the first thing we want to really do is figure out in our environment whether or not we have this piece of software that is vulnerable to remote code execution, right? Obviously, we need to know that, right? So sometimes, though, as the cyber threat intelligence analyst, asset management at your organization might not be as good as it should be. And even though IT might know the servers, Dev might know what is running on those servers. So an intelligence analyst really has to be skilled in the art of getting information from people who are super busy and may not actually understand how important this information is, i.e. continue to push your meetings back. So really the question is to ask specific questions. So for instance, in this little exercise, marketing and development both say that they have Drupal. All right, so that's now you've got an alert that came in, information. You now know that it's credible and reliable, and you now know that you actually have this software in your organization. So the next part is the hypothesis. So let's assume that it's a remote code execution vulnerability. Let's assume that it'll be weaponized by the bad guys and used against Drupal infrastructures. What could possibly go wrong? It's quite literally a hypothesis saying what would be the outcome. Well, you know, in layman's terms, that server could be co-opted by the bad guys, used to spray ransomware all over the place, used potentially as a breach into your organization, like a certain Panamanian law firm found out. All sorts of very bad things, okay? Conduct some technical analysis. So this is where now you understand what the remote code execution does, what the requirements are. Find out if your organization is truly vulnerable to this. Now, sometimes there's a proof of concept tool available. Sometimes you have to call a friend. Sometimes you have to ask other experts, listen to what's going on Twitter, read some blogs, etc. Here's an example of a technical analysis, an attack on a large financial organization that came in, and you can see the IP addresses that were conducting the attack. But when the paywall was analyzed, we didn't have any of these pieces to be exploited. Okay, so you see all these CVEs, including a CVE from 2013, all right? So really interesting that these were the payload exploits that we were being attacked with, including that Drupal remote code execution vulnerability, 2019-6340, and guess what? We didn't have any of that stuff exposed. So even though there was an attack that was going on, analysis indicated that, yep, it did have that payload, but we don't have that software in this particular case. So what the most important thing to do as a cyber threat intelligence is apply a so and so what methodology to your communications, right? Because nobody wants to read, you know, a giant report. Nobody has time for more than 2 scrollies on their iPhone in terms of getting the information. The bottom line is this: you have some software, it's vulnerable, bad things could happen and then you give them the options. If we don't patch, if we patch immediately, or if we patch on the next patching cycle. And again, the most important thing to do is to make a recommendation to the organization. because this is where IT falls down a lot of times, and IT security. And this is where you can be heroic. You can run into the boardroom with your hair on fire saying, we have Drupal and there's a remote code execution vulnerability and we're all going to die. That might be a little bit alarmist, okay? And it might also get you fired. But if you come in and say, we have a vulnerability, it looks pretty bad, but here's my recommendations on what we can do about it, that is a much better approach than just stirring up more fear, uncertainty, and doubt, especially with the underlying fear and uncertainty of doubt of COVID town. So keep that in mind, that your audience is going to be extra sensitive to anything that you say or do as you send it out. So it's super important is to make a recommendation and keep it reasonable. So going through this and kind of digging down a little bit more, we came up with 3 courses of action, or COAs, okay? We can do nothing, right? No, that might not be the best approach, right? It is remote code execution, right? We could patch immediately, but this might disrupt the organization. And again, that's not for you to decide. This is a recommendation that you're putting forward to your senior leadership saying, if we patch immediately, it is going to disrupt some sprints that we have. It might change some resourcing. It might require overtime. It could be that your infrastructure is hosted by a third party, so there might be an increased cost. All of these things need to go into your planning of what the course of action is going to be based on this information that you've now processed into intelligence. And then finally, your third COA is the one that might be a little bit more reasonable in terms of, hey, we realize right now that this could be bad, but it's not a super mission critical system. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just do this patch and update on the next window. The other thing to research, especially when you're doing these COAs, is to figure out what the level of effort would be. So this Drupal one would simply apply the latest patch, and generally, most likely, everything was going to be okay. In the case of the Apache Struts vulnerability that victimized Equifax, and yes, Equifax was a gong show, we all know that, but in their own defense, patching Apache Struts was quite an intensive process that would require a fair amount of code rewriting, okay, and a fair amount of development effort. So, you know, understand that that went into their equation. And as an example right now, a lot of folks are fighting with jQuery on older website implementations because it's coming up all the time in vulnerability scans. But unfortunately, yanking jQuery out and putting in a new version of jQuery may be very disruptive to whatever applications you have. So again, in cyber threat intelligence, we want actionable, timely, and accurate information to make decisions on. Concise and succinct writing. I get a lot of academics that are interested in cyber threat intelligence, and if you've read academic papers, the style of academia is to have the last part of the paper be the conclusion, the whiz bang, the crescendo of the research, if you will. That actually needs to be moved to the very top of a cyber threat intelligence document. And so there's a different style that we use to convey this information. So I'm now going to go through a few of my favorite things, as it were. And again, I said the presentation may devolve into what Ian really likes. Phil, quick time check, please.
Yeah, you're doing fine. You've got about another 10 minutes left because we started 5 minutes late.
Fantastic, and thanks for giving me the 5-minute grace there. So I love Have I Been Pawned. I find it's an incredibly powerful cyber threat intelligence tool, which is very predictive of whether or not you potentially could have a compromise in your organization, because your users, as much as we educate, as much as we work with them, are using the same passwords over and over again. They're using summer 2020. They're using fall 2020. They're using spring 2020, right? So Have I Been Pawned, very useful, very good source. If you're not using it, it's very easy to sign up with your email. And if you're an organization, you can protect your entire domain and get a list of any work email addresses that have been disclosed in a public data breach. This is becoming increasingly this is becoming an increasing threat vector against your organization, because bad guys will take that data and they will essentially look for a bunch of email addresses and potentially a bunch of disclosed passwords and try and gain a foothold into your organization through services that are not protected by multi-factor authentication, like web Outlook Outlook access, and exposed remote desktop protocol, RDP servers. So another thing that I really find very useful is if you can collect the information coming in against your servers, either remote desktop servers or web applications, find out who's failing logins and trace those back to the IP addresses, okay? Now, if you have load balancers, you've got to enable X headers in order to do this, but you can get a very good picture of what kind of bot activity you have that is hitting your organization and trying very noisy attacks like brute forcing passwords, right? Or password spray attacks. So these two very noisy attacks, very easily mitigated, and it's great for your own public relations, if you will, to be able to produce a little report like this, send it off to senior management and say, oh, by the way, this threat is real. Here are the IP addresses that we're attempting to break into customer accounts. Very useful. Really easy to make your own honeypot and get this telemetry. So as an example, take a box, throw like WordPress or Drupal on it, install some of these security plugins in your organization, put it out there, possibly put it in a subdomain, and just let it get hit and get those reports. Also very interesting to see if somebody is enumerating your subdomains and potentially trying an attack. And I love to have something out there that, you know, everybody can find, like a web daemon running, and they can hit that, but then put SSH on a non-standard port and see if that gets hit. Because if you're getting hit there and you're getting hit by SSH on a non-standard port, it means that somebody is really bound and determined to get at you, and you might now discover some sort of APT actor or some sort of malicious actor that is not just a bot, that is actually trying everything they can in order to break into your organization. So there's different layers that you can use of this type of technology in order to really build out your own threat intelligence program, because attacks that are hitting you are way more important than attacks that are hitting your neighbors, or attacks that are hitting your vertical, or attacks that are hitting your country. One of the failings of a CTI program is not to have enough granular information about what is happening in your own organization. This is why I tell people that your first step for CTI sanity is to set up a Google alert on your own company and see what happens if it's mentioned in the news, if key personnel have made announcements that you're unaware of, or if parts of your company have been sold. All true stories, by the way. So I highly recommend that. This is critical, and this is something that you can kind of gamify depending on where you are in the organization, is collect your own attack surface information. What do you have exposed? What are your external IP addresses? What are the domains that are important to your organization? There are tons of free tools out there in order to do that, but getting a picture of what is exposed to the internet and then asking dev and or IT, what are the pieces of technology behind those exposures, right? So as an example, like perhaps you have an older box that is running SSH and it's exposed to the internet. It'd be nice to know if that box was kept up to date or not, because as soon as a remote code execution vulnerability comes out for exposed SSH, you might want to know about that. And the fact that it's open to the entire internet versus being maybe geofenced is another area of conversation that you guys can have with your organization. Again, I tell people you want an immediate capability. You should never be exposing SMBv1 port 445 to the internet at the edge, because that's how you get WannaCry. That's how you get NotPetya. So what I recommend to organizations is get a firewall rule in place to block SMBv1 outbound, but also make sure there's an alert component to it. Because if there's an alert component to it and something gets inside and starts to crawl its way out, you have now blocked it at the firewall, but you're also alerted to the fact that something tried to make its way out onto the internet. And you know that you might have the eternal blue or double pulsar Trojan, double eternal blue exploit in place. So huge value, even from an old piece of kit that you can have there. So here's an example of how cyber threat intelligence can really benefit your organization. You can put together the domains of all of the phishing emails, and then using something like Multigo, Community Edition, pivot off of those to show what the IP addresses are. And rather than having to deal with thousands of hostile domains, you might find, and I did in my case in this article, it boils down to maybe 24 IP addresses. So you go from thousands of domains that are attacking you to a bunch of IP addresses. It's very easy to block a range of IP addresses. It's very hard to block thousands of domains that are coming in. So one of the things that you can do, especially in sort of the more advanced class, if you will, is really boil down the threat intelligence stuff that you're getting from your own organization and turn it into a practical and actionable thing to really disrupt the bad guys' plans. So again, monitoring your own organization's attack surface for indications of compromise is essentially, oh my God, we've ended up on a blacklist. What happens now? Okay, blacklists are compiled with by organizations that think that you have a problem or you are being a bad net citizen. And getting on a blacklist is a difficult and painful process to get off a blacklist. So monitoring for that kind of information early in your attack is really, really handy. And you know, I love logging and I love SIMs, but they can cost a lot of money. At the end of the day, one of the things, and I said that I would mention MITRE, is take the MITRE attack framework, figure out how you're going to detect activity that looks like an attack in your organization. And you can see here that in the logging of your Active Directory environment, you can see some telltale signs of what an attack looks like from the actual information being compiled in the logs. So we know that one of our threat vectors, one of our attacking vectors, loves to use scheduled tasks, okay? Loves to use Windows scheduled tasks to maintain persistence in the environment. So if you're looking for the creation of or any changes to scheduled tasks in your environment by looking at object access and detect system changes in your Windows directory, you now have an indication that something has happened on a workstation or on a server that shouldn't be happening, right? Especially when you start seeing things like new services installed on workstations or Active Directory servers. Usually, that's not a good thing at all. Another thing to do is monitor your external domain exposure along the lines of typo squatting and stuff like that. But eventually, what it comes down to is being really able to understand what your attack surface is. And I'm going to end on this because I really enjoy this exercise. If you're in for it, shoot me an email. I'll send you the details on these bad guys and see if you can glean from that stuff how these bad guys operate and what they do. And that's part of a larger workshop that I run that goes on for several hours, and then we deconstruct. The important thing is there's a lot of information out there in cyberspace about the attackers and what they could be potentially doing to your organization. And the idea is to really identify what those impactful attacks are and head them off at the pass.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, no, thanks. Some nice comments. Andrea says hello, and
Hey.
Yes. Well, I guess one good question to ask: how would someone partner with Cyjax? Especially, you know, someone in Germany. They could be an end user. They could be an MSP. How do they start to go about it?
Yeah, so the first thing is, of course, hit our website, take a look at some of our content. We just put out a really interesting report on the threat to national critical infrastructure, in COVID times. And we produce a lot of information. Read about us first, and then I would say if you're really interested in having a conversation, get in touch with myself, itt@cyjax.com. Or, fill out our little online forum, contact us, and we'll get in touch and see, if there's kind of a fit. One of the interesting things is there needs to be a desire for the organization to make an investment in what is, I like to call, a pure proactive approach to your cyber defenses. And what's interesting is this is a very human function. The tools to collect all the information are, of course, automated and stuff like that. But the analysis piece and the training for that analysis is the wonderful thing is the more you do it, the better you get. And by having some good coaching and mentoring and getting, actionable information, turning that into, oh, hey, we can head this off before we even get attacked. That's, the best cyber attack is the one that doesn't happen, so that's what we're all about. And we'd love to hear from anybody that's interested in what CTI could do for them.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. Well, I put your email address in the chat box. We're out of time actually, but no, this has been great. And CTI, I think, applies to the channel world, to the MSS world, to the end user world, and it's really important in Germany right now. So yeah, well, thank you very much. Let's give Ian a big round of applause, and we'll see you in the audience, and see you very, very soon.
You bet. Thanks very much.